was an adjunct professor of music for 16 years at Quincy College. I've also been an active touring musician, jazz musician, under my own name for 50 years. I've been on over 50, 55, maybe 60 recordings by now. I've lost track of them. And my music on TV frequently. So it's been a wonderful life. I've been married once, contrary to popular opinion. Jazz musicians do stay married. I've been married for a while, a long time. Okay, to one person. It's a very rough occupation. You cannot possibly understand how rough an occupation being a jazz musician is. And a lot of people, it takes its toll. For me, it was fun. It was 50 years of fun, and it's not over yet. But while I was a professor at Quincy College, I had certain courses that I taught, and one of them was the history of jazz. And the history of jazz is fascinating because the history of jazz reflects America's history as it moved forward. If you look at American music was only what people brought here. There was no indigenous American music except Native American music. There was no, we had no Brahms, we had no Mozart, we had no ethnic music at all. There was no ethnic American music at this time. The Pilgrims landed, the other colonists landed in West Virginia. They brought what they brought from where they came from. It was a hard life getting settled here, obviously. So they weren't thinking about music too much, okay? So, through the Revolution, pretty much all the music came from Europe, except for down in Appalachia, down way in the mountains in the south. They have a tradition that is still the same today. The music is unchanged today as it was in the 1600s. And you can still get on there and hear Barbara Allen, Scotch-Irish song. You can still hear Barbara Allen, this original form from Elizabethan England's time. You'll see instruments like dulcimers. They invented their own instruments to mimic the instruments they had at home. So there were lutes. Well, that's the dulcimer comes from the lute, right? The guitar is not around yet. We're going to get to the guitar is not part of that music scene yet. And the singing, right? If you go down to Appalachia and you listen to people sing, they actually sing these songs with an accent and pronounce the words like they were pronounced in Elizabethan England. Very interesting. Musicologists told me that. But the history of jazz starts sometime around Stephen Foster. And Stephen Foster was the first American composer. And he wrote all kinds of tunes about life in America. And most of it was America down south, because that's where we came from. So then the Civil War came. We still really didn't have much of a music scene. We had, drinking songs, funny songs. There was no pop scene, there was no pop music. All the music still kind of came from Europe or Africa. And slavery is part of the history of jazz. You can't get around it. Because when these people came from Africa, brought here as slaves, they brought their own musical traditions. And just bear that in mind as I'm talking the whole time. So one thing that their people that owned them did is they trained them on European instruments to play European songs, or to play the melody to these drinking songs that were part of American culture, or songs about military engagements or whatever, right? So the fiddler on the plantation is a very common occurrence. And he wasn't playing a fiddle as far as he was concerned. He was playing the American version of a stringed instrument from Africa, right? They also had a completely foreign influence on rhythms, the rhythmic nature of music. European music really was not very varied rhythmically. It was pretty easy. And if you listen to ethnic music from the time, from France or from Italy, it's almost the same. You can hear it, the same chord progressions, minor to dominant 7, minor to major. This is all very common all around the world in ethnic music. For some reason, minor keys, people like them better for ethnic music, whether it's klezmer music, which grew out of the Jewish tradition, or whether it's Italian music, right? Minor tunes are very common in any kind of ethnic music. So why did the Civil War make a difference? Well, what happened was, as we all know, the North won the Civil War, and Reconstruction happened. And Reconstruction was the Union stationed troops in the South, and they stayed there to make sure that the new laws were enforced. And this was a massive occupation of the South. That's where the Southerners looked at it. This was big. Union Army didn't leave. It didn't leave till the 14th Amendment. So what did they do with all of these military bands' instruments? What did they do with all the saxophones and the trumpets and the trombones? What did they do with them? They pawned them. The Army left them. And that's how the first era of jazz started. Because in New Orleans, there was a mixed group ethnically of people. There were African Americans, there were white French, there were Spanish, there were English settlers, right? A whole different culture. And the racism that was in America at the time was not really in New Orleans. First families in New Orleans were Creole. They were rich, they were the high society, and they had parties, they partied, they had beautiful mansions. So they used to invite these musicians who had just started to play this kind of new music, sort of, right, to their places to work. And, you know, that's how the music business basically started. It started in New Orleans. The other thing about the marching instruments is New Orleans, still to this day, has a tradition of marching bands. We've all seen them. The Dirty Dozen Brass Band. We've seen them all on TV. We've all heard them. That comes out of this same tradition. And what that does is it takes ethnic New Orleans music, French, Spanish, the amalgamations, French, Spanish, Creole, and they use those melodies and created these marching bands, right? So the first phase of jazz, the first era of jazz, is the Dixieland era. And I don't have a lot of time. I got to go through 6 eras in an hour or so, so I can't really devote a lot of time to each one. But the Dixieland era is the happy music. Anybody not familiar with Dixieland music? The Louis Armstrongs, that kind of thing? That's happy music. The reason that came about was because it grew out of World War I. World War I was depressing to the world. The carnage was absolutely unbelievable. If we had thought the Civil War was bad, World War I was a lot worse. Humanity invented brand new ways to kill lots of people all at once. And we have what they call the lost generation, right? Ernest Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, those people, right? American society was disillusioned. European society was disillusioned. So people wanted to have a good time, and that gets us to the flapper era, right? And here's an example. The way I'm going to run this talk is I'm going to talk about the eras and play different music from it for you. And here's something I know you have all heard. And then we'll discuss the instrumentation. Everybody in this room has heard this song. Right? Listen to the instrumentation. Try to pick out the instruments. Can you all hear the music?
Yep.
Yeah.
Banjo.
With a new tune, one blue tune, with a peculiar snap. When up the end to bottle wing, box right to step we would sing. Not like church, if you feel you can do the stance, do it now.
Enjoying it, right? You're enjoying it.
Reminds me of a Boardwalk Empire show.
Some friends, I'll say nothing finer than the Charleston. For how you can shuffle, every step you do leads to something. I'm telling you, it's a Lucas Rock dance. When dance will be like comfort, but the Charleston Charleston, that time should surely come. Oh, sometime you dance to it one time. The dance called the Charleston, made in South Carolina.
Okay, that's the Charleston, right? It's happy. And the reason it was happy is people wanted to be happy. And during the jazz era, which is they called that, the name of that group was John Peters' Gatsby Five. I mean, that is definitely a jazz age name for a band, right? Bathtub gin, right? Prohibition. People wanted to have a good time, right? And again, a recurring theme in jazz and popular music, young people's behavior unbelievably shocked older people. And that era was no different. So that's the fun flapper era, right? And that is not real Dixieland. As you can see, that's kind of a novelty tune, but that came first. What was the instrumentation? We had trumpet, we had clarinet, we had bass, we had piano, right? We had a pretty much what became the jazz quartet or quintet. Instrument does change. A lot of Dixieland bands don't use an upright bass player. What instrument do they use? Tuba, very good young lady, tuba. Product of Mr. Ferrante's Waltham Jazz Music. I have to know that for a fact. Tuba. And again, Dixieland is happy music or what they call a dirge, right? New Orleans Dixieland can be mournful, right? And that's the tradition, that's what they play. We've all heard the New Orleans funeral, right? What it is on the way in, it's a dirge, right? Sad. Once they bury the dude, it's Saints go marching in, let's go, right? Fun time, happy time. One of the biggest, also in the Dixieland era, was the start of a career of the most well-known American musician anywhere in the world. And in 2000, Time magazine did a poll. Who do you think was the most well-known musician at the start of the millennium? Who was the most well-known American musician worldwide? You got it, Louis Armstrong. Louis was the ambassador, remember? All the time all of us were growing up and Louis was alive, State Department was sending him here, sending him there, sending him there. Louis was a freak of nature. And when you hear this song, this is Louis' first recording, and this is called Milk Cow Blues. The other thing you have to understand is that at this time, in the 20s, the recording industry had just out. In fact, I forgot to bring it because I was a little rushed. I have some of those wax discs that Edison used to play on their players. That's the beginning of the American recording industry. By the 1920s, Bessie Smith had already sold 1 million copies of one of her blues songs, right? The recording industry was in full swing. So Louis' first recording was Milk Cow Blues, and he played it with an older musician. Believe it or not, Louis had to get employed by somebody first before he became Louis Armstrong. So an older musician named Sidney Bechet, you know the name, yes, a clarinet player, saxophonist. Sidney was the man at the time, and he hired young Louis Armstrong. And this is Milk Cow Blues. Hear the drum? The guy's hitting you over the head. You can't miss the beat. That's Louis. Check that out. Now listen to the background, what's going on in the background. You hear that? That's totally improvised. There was no music for this. They make that up in Dixieland. Oh, there's a piano.
Stand up.
There is a bass on this one, correct. That's called the ride. R-I-D-E, the ride in music. Wow. Okay, it's evident to everybody that Louis Armstrong would be a star, right? He was probably, I think, maybe 19 or something, 18, something like that. He had, they used to call him Gabriel. The sound of the trumpet was so pure. He was always spot on. His intonation never wavered. Louis could have a cold, and he would go, he was a pro. He went out to entertain 300 nights a year, and it didn't matter if he was sick or not. And he was, no one's ever said they saw a bad Louis performance. He was great. So the hallmarks of Dixieland, that's perfect Dixieland. That's early Dixieland, led by Sidney Bechet. There are two cornets, trumpet and cornet, right? And there's clarinet, piano, bass and drums, okay? While one person is soloing, right, or improvising, the other two instruments play a background behind them, which they make up. Improvisation is making something up, and that's like the first tenet of jazz. It's partially improvised music. This is brand new, right? And these guys were good players, and the reason they were good players is because a lot of the early white jazz musicians in this era, the Dixieland guys, right, which is called the Chicago School, and it was they call it the Austin High Gang. You can check them out on your own. These guys were educated musicians as far as for the day. They played in local symphony orchestras. They technique. Some of these teachers came from Europe to big cities in America, and they had tons of students, and they had that rigid European music discipline. And these guys became great instrumentalists on their horn. This is before jazz really started to take off. So you had a huge pool of musicians that could play their instrument was like it was second nature to them. And that person who exemplified the next era was Benny Goodman. And the next era of jazz is called swing. And we're going to play a swing piece of Benny's and listen to the difference, what the rhythm is doing now. This is basically 1930, it's a decade later, okay? Sorry, Ella. I hate to do that to you, Ella, but you're in the wrong spot. Here we go, okay. This is a decade later, think of this. If that. Listen to the sections playing off of each other. to that, that's Benny. He was as good as any European clarinet player playing in the symphony orchestra.
Who's the drummer?
Gene Krupa. This was Gene Krupa's feature, Sing, 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 Benny Goodman Orchestra. This is radical. There were no drum solos like this before the Benny Goodman Orchestra. None. Okay, it's 8.5 minutes long, which is like, they didn't do that either, right? The swing era was so different from the Dixieland era, and it required a different type of musician, okay? But as you heard, those Dixieland guys could play. A lot of the New Orleans guys were self-taught, right? But some of them weren't. But some of them, even Louis Armstrong, he studied with an incredible teacher in New Orleans, a trumpet teacher, cornet teacher really, based out on cornet first, was like a small trumpet. Benny Goodman was playing, his father was paying for clarinet lessons, and Benny had to learn the repertoire. So Benny Goodman practiced a lot. He was a very diligent student. He studied with a great teacher, right? I believe he's from Chicago. And Benny had the facility of playing an orchestra till this music grabbed him, right? There is no better, every clarinet player in the world will tell you there is no better clarinet player, technically, than Benny Goodman. And Benny Goodman, I know this for a fact because my friend was his accompanist, Chris Flory. Chris Flory, a guitarist in my generation, had a job, even when Benny was old. Every Monday at 1 o'clock, he had to go to Benny's apartment and they rehearsed for 2 hours, right? And Benny took a break, and then his classical pianist came in, and Benny played etudes on the clarinet, right? Benny was a deep, deep, deep musician. And he hooked up with a guy named Fletcher Henderson, which is an important name in jazz and no one really knows who he is. What made the swing era different is this is a full big band. Who's played the full big band in this room? I know you have, and I know you have. Anybody else? No products of the Waltham school system? Oh! Well, anyway, a full big band is a 4-piece rhythm section, guitar, bass, drums, and piano. It's 4 or 5 trumpets, it's 4 trombones, and it's 2 tenors, 2 altos, and 1 baritone sax. And occasionally, there'll be a woodwind player, like a clarinet player who also plays flute. But most clarinet is important. So if you're going to play in a band that was doing Benny Goodman's tunes when you were, if you were a young musician like I was at one time, right? You had to get a separate clarinet player because guys that play saxophone, the double on clarinet, it can hurt sometimes. I've been there, I know. So what are you going to do with all these musicians, 17 guys? What are you going to do? It'll be a train wreck unless you got a traffic cop, right? Fletcher Henderson was a traffic cop. He's very hard to find out a biography, there's not a lot of material on Fletcher. But he's credited with being the father of big band arranging. And in a nutshell, what big band arranging is you have a melody, you have a song, right? What you do is you harmonize the melody with one of the sections. So if you're playing, if you're listening to a big band with the melodies and the saxophones, the lead alto player, he plays the melody, and the arranger voices the rest of the sax section underneath that. Then he takes a line that's underneath, he gives that line to the trumpets, and he voices the trumpets that way, and then he takes the trombones and does the same thing. The other thing is you heard those bum, 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 bum on sing, sing, sing. Those are called pops, right? Those are written out, and they're written out for the section. If you look at the big band score, it's no different than a symphony score. Trumpets are up here, and the piano's down here, and it's all filled in, right? But the difference between jazz musicians and classical musicians is we memorize our music. There's a great story about the Woody Herman Band. They came to Nuttings on the Charles. Do we have our Nuttings on the Charles picture here? Somebody's gonna get it for me.
It's not,
Was there a Nuttings on the Charles picture?
it's here.
Here we go. Waltham had a dance hall, and it had a very famous dance hall. And it was called Nuttings on the Charles. Thank you so much. Yes, I am gonna sell the tree. You knew that, wow.
I do know that one. My dad studied under Margaret Shallow.
Margaret, I knew Margaret. I played in a band with Dickie Chiloff when I was in high school and after high school.
Yeah, and
That's your grandson.
yeah, my dad went to school with Serge, and it's like he went off to war, and Serge went into Woody Herman's band.
That's correct. That is Nuttings. You all have seen the piles in the river on the Prospect Street Bridge. This is it, okay? And it is a very, very famous ballroom. And my parents went there. My father took my mother there. And Benny Goodman came there. Count Basie came there. And Duke Ellington came there. Everybody came there. And there was a band, Woody Herman, and Woody came there. And with a big band, 17 pieces. And a local musician named Serge Charloff was the baritone sax player. And as that young woman observed, she knew Margaret, I knew. Margaret was a famous Russian classical pianist, and she taught everybody. In fact, one of her students we're going to talk about later, his name is Chick Corea. Margaret taught Chick Corea, okay, because he was from Chelsea, Mass, she was in Newton. I played in a band with Dickie Chiloff, her grandson, and her son, Dick, the elder, was the plumber customer of my father's. So anyway, Serge had the curse of jazz musicians. Serge was a junkie. And Woody had it. So Woody fired him. So allegedly, as the story goes, he couldn't afford to get fired. So he took the baritone saxophone book and he threw it in the Charles River. Away it went. So Woody couldn't fire him because he went on the baritone saxophone.
Wow.
Because you couldn't bring a new guy in because
Couldn't teach us.
there was no music program to read. So Serge kept his gig. Or at least he kept it for a while. But you know, that's the local, and that's a local story that all the people know about Woody Herman's band. So the big band era was huge. Big band leaders like Woody and Benny Goodman, the white band leaders, became huge stars. Benny Goodman was making more money than any musician ever. And his salary, if you do the math the way people do today, right? He was making millions and millions and millions. Ready for this? A month at the height of his career. And Benny Goodman did something in the history of jazz that changed the world. Benny Goodman desegregated jazz. Benny Goodman's brother-in-law, that's right, Benny Goodman was a demanding, I've known people who play with him, Scott Hamilton played with him, Chris Flory played, I know these guys, my contemporaries. He was demanding, Benny. A tough boss, and he only wanted the best in his band, only the best. So he thought to himself, well, if I want the best, why can't Fletcher Henderson play piano for me? So his brother-in-law was John Hammond, who was also one of the first jazz impresarios, and Benny's wife was his sister, and they owned half of Manhattan, allegedly, real estate. So the Hammonds had no money woes at all. So one day Benny called his agent and said, I want Fletcher Henderson in my band. I want Lionel Hampton in my band. I want this guy Charlie Christian in my band. I want so-and-so in my band. And the manager goes, you can't do that, Benny. You won't work. He goes, no, I won't work. You figure it out. So what's the guy gonna do? So he calls all these places across the country, famous ballrooms, and say, Benny ain't coming unless you accept his new integrated band. Well, guess what? They did. Huge success. Benny treated, according to the guys I know, Benny treated his people fantastically. And Benny treated them great. Just you had to deliver the goods. If you didn't deliver the goods, you got what's called the ray. He would look at you with the band, and you knew you were in trouble. So Benny's new integrated band was a hit. Then Benny took it one step further. He decided, I want to give a concert with all the great bands at Carnegie Hall. I want to give a concert with all the great musicians. So he did a thing called Spirituals to Swing. One of the most famous jazz concerts ever, 1938. And it had blues. It had ragtime. It went through all the eras that I didn't have time to talk about tonight, right? Or this afternoon, right? He had Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Have you ever heard of her? She became the rock and roll female guitar player in the late 50s. But she was a gospel singer, and her voice was incredible. So he had all these, and Carnegie Hall rented the hall to Benny. They wouldn't book the gig. He had to pay them to get the hall. No one thought this was going to be a success. Well, guess what? It sold out like that. And there was a record, Spirituals to Swing, because Benny recorded it all. John Hammond, his brother-in-law, recorded it all. The next year, they did it again. Okay? 1939, Spirituals to Swing. These are seminal jazz concerts in American history. It broke the color barrier, and musicians always hung around together, right? There was none in our occupation, you don't find what you found elsewhere. We know who's good, we know who's bad. There's one criteria in jazz. My wife will tell you what it is. What is it, Jackie? You only play with people that can play. That's it, right? Because you don't learn if you don't play with people that can play. I started out playing with people that can play so I could learn how to play, right? I worked with Leon Marion, one of the greatest trumpet players you know Leon, one of the greatest trumpet players in America. I was in Leon's band. I was his guitar player, right? Today, to this day, I play in Fred Lipsius's band. Does anybody recognize the name Fred Lipsius? Beverly does. Fred Lipsius was an alto saxophonist with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the original member of the band. Fred is 82 years old. Fred is the most incredible bebop saxophonist you have ever heard. And I sit there night after night going, how did I get here? I have no idea how I got here. 40 years I've been playing with Fred. 40 years, right? That's how you play. So Benny wanted the best. He didn't want the second best vibraphonist in the world. He wanted the best vibraphonist, and that was Lionel Hampton. There were no electric guitar players. Charlie Christian is the father of electric guitar. Benny gave him a shot. John Hammond brought him all the way from Oklahoma City to sit in with Benny. Benny loved him and hired him. And that's the next piece we're going to hear. Benny also liked small bands. He had a quartet. He had a Benny Goodman trio. No bass player. Fletcher Henderson on piano, White playing bass with the left hand. Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa, just a trio, right? He had a quartet, right? And then he had the sextet, the Benny Goodman sextet. This is the most famous small group in jazz ever. To this day, every guitar player in the world has all these records. If you don't, you're not a jazz guitar player. Ask any of them. You go see John Pizzarelli, you say, hey John, do you have any Charlie Christian, Benny Goodman records? He'll say, yeah, Dad had them all too. His father's name's guitar player. So here we have 7 Come 11 from the Benny Goodman Sextet. This is the epitome of small group arranging also. Again, it's still arranged, and it's much different than Dixieland. Listen to the tempo, too. Vibes, guitar, and clarinet all playing the melody. Benny. That's the first electric guitar, Charlie Christian. Totally uneducated, totally. Another ride, hear it? A ride. Now the vibraphone solo. Listen to that clarinet. Boom. Isn't that great? That recording is probably 1936 or 37, right? The Benny Goodman Sextet. And there are, in 1975, Columbia, these were on Columbia Records. That's how long Columbia Records has been around, right? Benny Goodman signed to Columbia. They found all the original tapes of the sextet, right, in a salt mine. Columbia had stored them. And these guys are still alive at this time, right? And one of the guys said, "No, that ain't right, man. We have more stuff than that. That's it." This is unbelievable. The trash man in New York was picking the trash up one day, and he found what they call acetate masters. Acetate was the first record, and it's a plastic. And the original song was cut with a lathe while the band performed. And there was a microphone, and it cuts how you cut the grooves. That's where all this terminology comes from. Well, they found a box of these on the sidewalk somebody put off for trash. And it was the rest of the Benny Goodman Sextet Masters from 1930.
Wow.
So there was a double album. Now you can buy this little beautiful little box set, and it looks like a 1938 Gibson amplifier, and every single Benny Goodman Sextet song is on 6 or 7 CDs. Guitar players kill for it, they love it. So you can see how the rhythm has changed. No longer is the drummer beating you over the head. He's keeping time. He's got the ride cymbal going, which is the one on the right-hand side. He's got that going like crazy to keep the musicians in check, and the bass player's walking. The bass player's going doom, 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 walking the bass. The rhythm section has now become important because Dixieland and swing music is dance music, right? The dance craze, I forget the name of the dance, the Lindy Hop, that was the swing. Ballrooms full of young, again, young people, right? So now we get to the allegedly big era in jazz, but unfortunately, I want to play one more. I have to play Count Basie's 1 O'Clock Jump. This is one of the black bands, Count Basie Orchestra. This is called the All-America Rhythm Section. And that's Freddie Green on guitar. This is the most famous swing rhythm section ever. Benny Goodman, Count Basie's America Rhythm Section. And as you can see, Count was a pretty good piano player. He learned his trade in whorehouses in Kansas City. Swing, it's just swinging. It's a different groove than the Benny Goodman band. It's laid back, it's really like. And that's Basie's most famous soloist, tenor saxophonist, Lester Young. That was Lester Young. You hear the space Basie's leaving? I got a story to talk about that afterwards. And again, you can hear the section work. Basie's band was known for what they call a sax solo, which is all saxophones playing the melody, the 1 o'clock jump in unison. Hurry down the solo. Little background lines. Okay, so you got the idea what counts. See, there's a different groove, right? All these soloists, right? Georgie Auld. Does anybody remember the Charlie commercial?
Yeah.
Beverly does, right? Perfume from the 70s,
Yeah.
right? They wanted the gentleman, the creative people that were doing the ad for Charlie, wanted the saxophonist that played on some particular Benny Goodman recording. And they tracked down an 82-year-old Georgie Auld, and he's the guy that was on the Charlie commercial. When he was 40 years old, he was a star, and everybody knew who Georgie Auld was. Same as everybody knew who Lester Young was, AKA Prez, right? These big band soloists became actual stars, like Madonna. These guys, and they went out on their own and created their careers. Again, remember I said jazz musicians learn from other musicians? Well, you spend your time in a big band, you learn the trade, and it's time to go out. The only problem is that big bands to run are extremely expensive. So a lot of them failed. And Count Basie had a policy when you left him, go right ahead, no problem, because he knew you'd be back. And they came back. Lester Young came back a dozen times, I guess. So that's the dance music, the swing era, everything's happy. During the height of the swing era, what happened historically in the world? World War II. So as my father, he left here in 42, came back in 49. He wasn't interested in going to see concerts. He was dance halls. He was interested in getting on with his life. He got married in 49, like a lot of veterans. They got married after the war, 45, 46, raised a family. So now there's no audience. Big band's gone. Can't support themselves. There's actually Count Basie cut his band down to 9. And Freddie Green, the guitar player doing this thing here that you heard so prominently, and was part of the heartbeat of the Great American Rhythm Section, he had to let him go. He had been with Basie since Kansas City, 1930, right? refused to leave. Every night he showed up to play and found that Basie just said, okay, fine, and gave him a check. But Basie had to cut his band down. Ellington did also. Which is the most famous, another famous big band, Duke Ellington band. So what does jazz have? Well, jazz is moving forward no matter what. Musicians are moving forward. As I said, the best, you learn from the best, you play with the best, and then you create your own. That's how it works in this trade. So the next era in jazz is the bebop era. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows Dizzy Gillespie, correct? Does anybody that doesn't know Dizzy? Dizzy was one of the architects of the bebop era. Dizzy was a trumpet player with the big cheeks and the trumpet that went up like that in the air, right? Very distinct guy. His partner in crime was Charlie Parker, right? Charlie Parker was another Kansas City guy. Think about that. How come we have Basie and then we have Charlie Parker? What is going on in Kansas City? Well, what's happening in Kansas City is it's one of those meccas of jazz, and it was not like today. There's no internet, right? There was no TV. It was radio, right? So guys are developing their styles in a different era, in a different area, right? The Los Angeles jazz musicians developed what they call cool jazz, right? Kansas City jazz is a very distinct style, and if you see the movie, ever seen the movie Kansas City? Those are real jazz musicians playing in that movie. They're real guys that make their living playing jazz. So these towns all had their own things brewing musically. Charlie Parker was working in Kansas City. He worked with a band leader that I played with, Jay McShann, and Jay McShann was a band leader from Kansas City that allegedly, the story goes, the town was not big enough for Basie and Jay McShann. This is Jay was the king of Kansas City, which I happened to find out when I went out there with him, right? Basie had to leave, so Basie went to New York. The story about the hand is he's playing in brothels, right? And in Kansas City, politicians, I mean, you know, well-to-do people frequent these places. It's just not for prostitution. It's drinking, it's cutting deals, it's nightclubs, right? So Basie's playing, right? And he sees the mayor of Kansas City, so he's playing his little lick. And, hey man, how you doing, right? Goes back, and that's where they say he developed that very spacious right-hand style where you hear the piano just stop playing. He'll leave space. That's Basie. And Charlie Parker had the curse again. Charlie Parker was a junkie since he was 16 years old, right? And Jay McShann told me personally that it was, he knew nothing, he would come to no good in the end. Not musically. He said Charlie just didn't understand. You had to back off of certain things. So Charlie Parker was like this bright flame. He moved to New York, I think, when he was probably 28 maybe or something. And he was dead at 34 years old. Wow. Maybe 32, something like that. I don't know the dates. In that era, he changed jazz completely. Charlie Parker changed jazz absolutely completely. Because his saxophone style of playing and understanding, as did his partner in crime, Dizzy Gillespie, that there were upper structures musically that could be improvised over. So if you had, basically, if you had a chord called C7, there were a whole bunch of other things that you could play over a C7 chord no one ever thought of. And that's what happened. And then they added chromaticism, playing notes chromatically, like approaching notes differently, playing a lot of blues inflected phrases, right? So the hallmarks of bebop are blues inflected phrases, extremely fast tempos. Bebop was to get rid of the guys that couldn't play. You don't want to play with cats, man, can't play. So if you can't cut this tempo, you can't cut these changes, you're gone. The other thing is they didn't write their own tunes when they first started out. They took well-known American standards, like what is this thing called Love, or Indian Summer, right? And they used the chord changes as their vehicle to explore improvisation further. And the bebop era produced some absolutely incredible technicians. And the whole era didn't last from, let's say, 1944 to the death of Charlie Parker. That was it in Charlie died March 10th, 1954. Here is a recording from a group called Clifford Brown, Max Roach, and it's called Joy Spring. Joy Spring was recorded, I found out today, the day I was born. I didn't know that when you were around this morning. So here's, listen to the virtuosity of the instrumentals. Bebop quartet, quintet. 2 horns, bass, piano, and drums. That's the standard bop quintet. That's a famous bop saxophonist, Harold Land. It's not pretty, is it? It's not pretty, is it? Right? Yeah, so do I, but you and I have a quiet taste. The virtuosity. Clifford Brown, one of the greatest trumpeters in jazz ever. But he doesn't have Louis' tone, does he? The Boppers weren't known for tone. Everything was a slide. They were sliding. That was Clifford Brown and Harold Land. Bop quintet is always trumpet and saxophone. Okay? Virtuosity. If you listen to the rhythm, it's not like Count Basie, it's not 4 to the bar, right? The piano player is breaking the rhythm up, right? All the music on these recordings is Clifford Jordan walked in with a lead sheet, and it had the melody, and it had the chords. The rest of it's all created in the studio. It's not like the big band era. There are no arrangements. The arrangement comes as you play. There might be, we're going to do this, then we're going to go here. The piano player started out, well, yeah, you take a few, then when I get ready, I'm going to come in. Very casual. It was music for hipsters, beatniks, and musicians. And so the record industry does not like people who don't make money. So the thing was, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie's experiment, along with Thelonious Monk, jazz piano player, Sonny Clark, Max Roach, Clifford Jordan, Harold Land, That experiment ended in the 50s. It's a great era in jazz. It's the era that influenced me probably the most, right? Because it's modern jazz, which is what I play, right? Is based on these concepts, musical concepts that they pioneered. They're just at the wrong time. And they made it not friendly. You've all heard the story about Miles Davis, right? Turn his back around, right? They made it not friendly, and the record companies don't deal with that. The next person we're going to deal with, obviously, is Miles Davis. Miles has no era. There is a story that he was invited to the Nixon White House for dinner, and he's sitting next to some lady, and she doesn't know who he is. She sees this very handsome, very well-dressed black gentleman sitting next to her, and she says, "What did you do to deserve here?" And Miles says to her, he says, "Well, I was at the forefront of 5 eras in jazz. What did you do?" Miles was at the forefront of 5 eras in jazz. Miles's father sent him to Juilliard from St. Louis, right? Miles spent his tuition hanging out with Charlie Parker, doing heroin and learning the trade, right? He got it firsthand. He got the best education in the world because Miles had already learned how to play trumpet. He had the greatest tone. Miles didn't play like Clifford Brown or Dizzy Gillespie. Miles, it was total control of the instrument. These beautiful notes came out of that horn, right? And Miles could play anything. If he could hear it, Miles could play it. And he and Charlie Parker had a quintet together. He took Dizzy Gillespie's place because Dizzy had finally had enough. Dizzy couldn't deal with Parker not showing up for gigs, because that means Dizzy don't get paid. He couldn't stand for Parker not showing up for recording sessions. How bad it was with Charlie Parker? He had a recording called Bird with Strings. This is one of the first recordings of a jazz musician with a string section. The person fronting the money was a Parisian record producer. He came all the way to America to produce this because Charlie wouldn't go over there. Charlie never made the session. He didn't show up the first day. Didn't show up. Right? They found him. The producer was furious. They brought him, whoever was his manager brought him in. Charlie promised he'd do a good job. Somebody ran up and got him a bag of smack. That I heard personally from Teddy Kodak, who was on the session. He was a bass player, old gem I played with. Again, learning to trade from people that know people. He said, "Bird played fantastic. You go buy a record, Bird with Strings, it's fantastic." But the day before, he couldn't even put the saxophone in his mouth. And eventually, what happened is that no one would deal with Bird. That was his nickname, Bird. No one would deal with him. And when Dizzy left him, that was the end. He was done. And unfortunately, he OD'd one night, and that was the end of the story. Except it was the largest funeral in jazz history ever. Louis Armstrong even was there. And he didn't like Charlie Parker. He didn't like the music. Anybody that was anybody in music was at Charlie Parker's funeral. He was a real innovator. We haven't seen one like him yet. But Miles was there for all of it. Miles started out in the bop era, and right till the day he died, he was on top of things. So we're going to play some Miles. We're not going to play the pretty Miles that you people all know. We're going to play some really hard to listen to Miles. And the reason I'm doing that is because the next era. We're going to give you a little bit of so what. This is Miles's modal era. Miles Davis single-handedly introduced modes to jazz. This is like his concept. And this is earth-shattering. It was earth-shattering in 1959. The name of the record is Kinda Blue. It's sold something like, I don't know, 60 million copies worldwide. It's been reissued. I have like 4 copies somewhere at home, right? It's been reissued with extra tunes, that's right. And the band was a who's who of jazz. Cannonball Adderley on saxophone, one of the great post-bop saxophonists. John Coltrane on tenor saxophone, right? Bill Evans on piano and Wynton Kelly on piano, right? They split the session, right? And Jimmy Cobb on drums, and I forget who's the famous bass player who played with Miles forever, Jimmy, what?
Stanley Clark. Stanley Clark.
No, not Stanley, I can't think of his name. There's a great famous rhythm section. I'll think of it. But anyway, this is the band that 1959 record, So What? It turned jazz on its head. And this is the other thing, at this right time, Miles pioneered, because the recording technology allowed it, Miles pioneered the 9 to 10 minute tune. And here is So What? Listen to that unhurried, no searching for notes. He knows what he's doing. Seamless. Miles signaled to the saxophone player 30, 40 seconds before he stopped. I'm winding down, now it's your turn. It's all communication. Jazz is communication. Anybody know who that is on saxophone? Okay. No. Maybe. 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 And now, this is what I should do with my classes, right? I'm not gonna tell you who followed who. Miles was first. Stylistically, the saxophones are very similar. Stylistically, not tone-wise, but stylistically, correct? This is the new music. This is modal music. One of the things is you have to have a strong playing identity when you play modal music, or you get lost in the shuffle. Those are two of the greatest musicians of that era and beyond. So you go home, you listen to Cannonball, you listen to John Coltrane, and you'll know who it is. Because they still have their individual voice. It's just, this is brand new. Miles rehearsed this band at like maybe a week gig at the 5 Spot, right? Then it was time to make a record. That's how they did it in those days. So these guys are still figuring out what they're gonna play, right? But they kind of knew what Miles wanted. 6 months after this, they would have destroyed that tune. Coltrane would have been all over that. You would have heard saxophone for 10 minutes. In fact, another story about Miles and Coltrane, Miles kept yelling at him live. He kept going on and on. He goes, well, Miles, I don't know how to stop. Once I start, he goes, it's easy, take the horn out of your mouth. Miles was tough. He wasn't tough like Benny Goodman, he was a lot tougher than that. So that's modal music. Now, one thing about the eras of jazz is they're all existing again at the same time. Louis Armstrong still has a Dixieland career while Miles is creating Going Forward Kind of Blue, right? Benny Goodman's still playing gigs at this point in 1959. That's the beauty of when I came along. I had all these eras of jazz. I could go to the jazz workshop and see all these eras in a month because they've all coexisted since then. The next era in jazz after bop is hard bop. Hard bop is a reaction to the financial panic of the record companies about the bebop era. If you risked your money on bop musicians, you usually lost it. So now they want to recover. But the musicians want to break. The musicians want to break from all this virtuosity, all of this music for the sake of music, right? So what they did is the next era in jazz is called, and they also get tired of the format, you know, two horns, piano, bass, and drums, right? So the hard bop era became a reaction to the bebop era, but also a bridge to the next era in jazz. And the most famous band of the hard bop era was Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. Because the Jazz Messengers were a learning school. He had this concept. I'm gonna get young cats, I'm gonna give them a chance, I'm gonna be the boss, I'm gonna ride herd on these kids and they're gonna make great music. And he didn't want to hear the bebop language. He wanted to hear the groove. He was a drummer. He wanted to hear things that grooved. So a lot of soul music, you all grew up with soul music, it's your era, right? Elements of soul music, elements of blues, right? And pop music came into the hard bop era. One of the biggest hard bop songs is Mercy, 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 right? Yeah. You all heard the vocal version, right? Which was a hit on AM radio when we were all in high school or junior high school, right? Well, the Art Blakey version became a huge hit. And the guy that wrote Mercy, Mercy was Joe Zawinul, his young piano player who he brought from Europe, right? So here is another great pianist that Blakey had in his band. This is written by a great jazz pianist. I think it's gone out of my head.
What's his name?
He's Gerard's favorite pianist, Jackie.
Bobby Timmons.
Bobby Timmons, thank you, Monty. Bobby Timmons was a tragic figure in jazz. He died by the time he was 36 years old, he died of cirrhosis of the liver, brought on by alcoholism. So you think how rough this guy's life was. He was way too young. There's not much anybody knows about him. Again, one of those kind of lost souls where the family's lost. No one has any idea really. There's never been a Bobby Timmons biography. And another jazz biographer told me there is no Timmons biography because they don't know anything about him. They don't know who his family was, nothing. They have no roots, nothing to go back on. But when he was with Blakey, he made music, incredible music. And this is a song he wrote. I know you've all heard this. This is called Moanin'. Art Blakey. Soul influences, right? Hear a little Miles in there also, right? Oh, sorry. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
There we go, okay. And you hear the blue notes, right? Three horns, back to a larger band. This is three horns. You're grooving, Jimmy, right? Yeah, right? You can't help it. He's a drummer. can have fun with this. Jazz is fun again, right? Okay, I want to stop that. I know, moaning, you're going to listen to it. I got time constraints, I want to play some Cannonball Adderley. This was the most lucrative area for jazz at that time. And it ushered into the 60s, right? This kind of good jazz is fun again. It's virtuosic. I mean, listen, I can tell you from experience, blowing over the chord changes to moaning is not easy. You gotta know the tune, you're gonna get skunked. There's no doubt about that. But I wanna play some Cannonball from the same era, because Cannonball is like the epitome of the hard bop alto saxophonist. Oh, a little more Art Blakey. This is called Along Came Betty. The grooves, see how it's grooving? It's not frantic, right? It's cooking, but it's like bubbling. So we can groove to this. Okay, for some reason I can't find my Cannonball, but I found another alto saxophonist that I wanted to get to. You've all heard of Dave Brubeck?
Yes.
Okay, Dave Brubeck doesn't fit any of these eras. Dave's in his own era, right? His record blew people away. And the first record was called Time Out, all right? That blew the jazz world away. He was in his own little area of jazz, and his jazz quartet electrified the world. What it did is brought a new audience to jazz. The audience was college students. Late 50s through the 60s, he played every single college in America. He didn't play jazz clubs. And until the day he died, which was not that long ago, he was still playing either huge concerts in arenas, or he was playing concerts in colleges. He lived in Connecticut, right? And this is the most famous tune of his, and it features my favorite alto saxophonist of all time. This is the guy I would love to have played with. I never got a chance to. This is Dave Brubeck's quartet featuring Paul Desmond on alto saxophone, and it's his most famous tune. I know you've all heard it. Right? That's Paul Desmond. Those beautiful alto saxophone sounds. notice how relaxed he played. That's the trademark of the Dave Brubeck group. Dave was a classically trained pianist, and he grew up in the West Coast, completely divorced from the bebop era, the hard bop scene of the East Coast, right? And Desmond didn't want to play with him. He went over to his house to play. He says this in his book. He said, he goes, man, I went over to his house to play. This guy couldn't play. But then he realized that it wasn't that Dave Brubeck couldn't play. He couldn't play what Brubeck wanted him to play. They became the most famous team in jazz, right? Brubeck could not have existed without Paul Desmond, and Paul Desmond could not have existed without him. And my favorite Desmond record, these records he made with a guitar player in 1974. He eventually left Brubeck because Paul Desmond wrote Take 5. And Take 5 to this day earns in excess of $100,000 in royalties every single year like clockwork. Paul Desmond became a New York, like Happen and Cat man. He was dating movie stars. If he wanted to play, all he had to do was walk into whatever jazz club he wanted to in Manhattan with a saxophone, and whoever would play him would say, hey, you want to sit in? Because musicians like to hang out and play, right? He had the life, right? And he wanted to make 2 records with this Canadian guitar player, so he did, right? Those are my favorite records. But what they lack is that they don't lack that experimentation you heard. You heard, right? Brubeck is feeding him chords. It's a whole different style of Paul Desmond. He learned real quick that he was in the presence of a musical genius, and that was Dave Brubeck. The next era of jazz is the avant-garde era. And I'm going to play a couple of quick things because we do have a little schedule here. Avant-garde basically throws out the rules. There are no rules now. And a lot of your tax dollars support avant-garde music through the years because it's hard for them to get an audience. But by the same token, if these guys can't make a living, at least a marginal living playing, they're not going to develop new things. So you are investing in the future of jazz. That's the future of jazz. Your tax dollars investing in jazz, right? And I hate paying taxes, but I got to tell you, when I see that some so-and-so got a grant, some musician that I like, that I know hasn't made any money, I like to see that because it allows that to continue. But some of the music people don't like, and I'm not going to judge it because I know these people work very hard on their music. It's not my favorite stuff, okay? But here we go. And we'll play a little bit of each. This is Ornette Coleman. And Ornette's record, Shapes of Jazz to Come, got panned. I mean, like, Ornette got destroyed in the jazz press. But guess what? Musicians loved it. They loved his attitude, right? His fearlessness, right? So Ornette's had a career. I don't know if he's dead yet. He's pretty old, but he had a career. I know guys that play with Ornette, man, and they tell you it's an experience and a half. You know, that there's no rules, but there are rules. There's like a really weird thing avant-garde jazz. And I don't play it. I'm the first to admit it. It's not my kind of music, and I'm not too happy with playing it. But here is John, what is his tune? Lonely Woman. Here we go. Lonely Woman. Ornette plays graphs. He doesn't give musicians music, he gives them graphs with little pencil things on them. You interpret the graph. That's one of his concepts. that was the resolution. Nah. And I'm sure you're all relieved to hear the resolution, right? Okay, that was the resolution. It was like 4 musical phrases with Ornette playing the melody, I assume, and the other gentleman creating behind him. And it's atonal, it's dissonant, right? People like, most people like to hear atonal music that is consonant, right? Avant-garde music at times can be atonal and dissonant, and it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Here is the king of avant-garde jazz, and he played with Miles Davis. This is the last piece I'm going to play, some of it. This is John Coltrane. This is called Africa, and it's from the Africa Brass Record. Notice the similarity, how he and Ornette start the tune? Notice the similarity of the drums?
Yeah, big time.
That's McCoy Tyner on piano. He's a very fine pianist, by the way. Notice how it kind of gets into a Miles Davis style modal groove here. He learned his lesson, right? From the best, Miles. So, that is John Coltrane, and if you know anything about Train, he left Miles, he was addicted to junk, like serious, right? He kicked a cold turkey, he didn't go to the hospital, didn't do any of that stuff, he just locked himself in a room, kicked cold turkey, and he started working on this kind of very expressive avant-garde jazz. Coltrane is still one of the greatest jazz saxophonists of all time. You heard him on So What, right? I can highly recommend 2 records because that is not everybody's taste. And it's unfortunate that's what people know Coltrane for. Jazz listeners that like to listen to jazz, that's what they know Train for. And I've heard it once, I've heard it a million times. You people are really polite. My 15 student class at Quincy College were less polite. And they couldn't understand it. But I had more time to show them about Train, right? 2 unbelievable records by John Coltrane. They are my favorite recordings. The album jackets that I bought the albums in when I was going to Berkeley are on the wall coming into my basement, among other favorite LPs of mine. It's John Coltrane plays ballads, John Coltrane plays the blues. If I had 2 records to take to a desert island to listen to, I'm a guitar player. You know how hard it is for me to say that? I would take both of those. Train is an incredible musician. Where's jazz going? Who knows? Right? You just saw 100 years go by in an hour and a half. So thank you so much for coming today.
There's a guy I used to hear called Gerry Beaudoin. He played the xylophone.
He played the vibraphone.
Xylophone.
Gerry Beaudoin is one of the founders of the jazz fusion movement. Gerry Beaudoin is the most incredible musician. I would say the two greatest musicians I have ever met was Gerry Beaudoin and Fred Lipsius from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I had improvisation classes with Gerry Beaudoin at Berkeley. Gerry Beaudoin is an incredible musician, and he started that jazz fusion before it was fusion. And if you want to hear a record, that you can see that. It's the Gerry Beaudoin Quartet. It's called Duster. I bought it in a throwaway bin in high school. It was like, holy cow, who is this guy? I was so thrilled to be able to say, I know Gerry Beaudoin. Right? He was my favorite. Many, many years, Gerry was my favorite musician.
He did some nice albums with Getz.
He did some great, well, those, in fact, if we have more time, I had one of those queued up. Right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, Gerry was playing with Stan Getz, one of the greatest saxophonists of all time. He was 19 years old.
Oh, my God.
Self-taught, lived in Indiana. He used to play against the radio. And he used to play cowboy music. His first record, I have it. Check this out. His first record is Tennessee Firebird. It was made in Nashville. It's a country record with him playing vibes. It's wild. So thank you again for coming. Please listen to